right, I appreciate everyone who's been waiting for us to get started. We're starting just a couple minutes late because literally as I was clicking the button to go live, I noticed I didn't like the tilt of the camera, and so I went to adjust it, raised up my monitor, and because it's all in one computer, the computer got unplugged in the process and just had to shut down and restart everything. So, yeah, that's where we are today. But anyways, we'll be getting into our study tonight, talking about pride. We're talking about pride and scornfulness, how the two of those things connect one to the other. And so I'm hoping it'll be a help to everyone as we get into this and discuss some things that will actually go very much with our Sunday message. And so because of that, I may keep the Bible study a little bit shorter tonight. We'll see. I thought last week was going to be short. It was fairly normal in time. But we'll try to keep it maybe a little bit short tonight just because of the fact that I'll be talking about pride as an abomination on Sunday in the midday service. And so this is kind of like the bridging of the gap between what we've talked about with wisdom and what we've been talking about with those things that God calls an abomination. So because of that, I may try not to step on my toes too much for Sunday. So anyways, hopefully everybody remembers some of what we talked about last week, because a lot of that's going to be relevant to this week as we consider the fact that a lot of times the things we are discussing in this study are linear. So, for example, the journey from the fear of the Lord to sound wisdom is a linear journey. You get on the path when your heart gets touched by the fear of the Lord, and as your wisdom solidifies, as you see God more and more for who He is, as you get a greater ability to use the wisdom that you have, that solidifies until it becomes sound wisdom. Whereas the journey away from that truth, started by unbelief into foolishness and then frowardness, is a journey of someone who loses their grasp of the truth, and it gets to the place where they just don't care about the truth. And so it's a linear journey. We'll see as we talk about, probably we'll put the two of them together next week, but as we talk about knowledge going into subtlety and simplicity going into brutishness, mainly we may put them together just because there's not a lot to say about brutishness, and it is something that, we probably could drag it out and talk about why it's important for you to speak nice, but other than that, there wouldn't be a reason to do a deep study on that because of the fact that there's not a lot said about it in the Bible, and there's just not a lot to say about it. But all that aside, both of those journeys are linear journeys. It's your education is going to affect your speech, and we know your heart does as well. But in terms of how you speak, somebody who's educated to a certain level is going to reflect that in the way they speak. That's a linear journey. So we see with all of this that most of these things on the list, or not all of this, but most of this, what's on your list are linear things. So you start here and you go in this direction. However, we saw last week with humility and the way that it connects to understanding is that it's not linear at all. It could be a mutual relationship. You could say it that way. You could call it circular, whereas in one's feeding directly into the other and it just keeps going. But it is interesting to say the least, because it's not like what we saw with these others where it's a linear thing. You're going from one to the other. In this case, a man's pride could be the thing that leads him to be a scorner, whereas the more of a scorner he is, the more proud he's going to be. Same thing we saw last week, that humility certainly can cause somebody to be more understanding, but the more understanding somebody is, the more humble they're going to be. So these are two things that really seem to be less linear and more just growing side by side, connected one to another. So that's why it's a little bit different in this case. So I'll bring up that chart just to make sure everybody's kind of on board with some of what we're talking about here. And so you have your chart here. We talked about last week understanding and how that leads into humility. Again, I am acknowledging that it's not fair to say it leads into humility, as that they feed one off the other. They are connected in a similar way that wisdom and understanding are connected. And humility is often talked about in connection with wisdom as well. However, it seems to be that understanding is the one that actually produces that humility. And the same thing that pride, everybody thinks of a fool as being proud because the Bible talks about it in that way. But it's more so that pride that fuels the foolishness is on the scornful side of things. He's proud because he's scornful, or he's scornful because he's proud, and that leads into something that grows alongside his foolishness. So that's what we're going to be looking at today: is that scornfulness and the proud and haughty spirit. Like I say, next week. Next week I'm assuming I'll still be teaching this. There won't be any kind of hang-ups, but next week we'll be talking about subtlety and knowledge, and then we'll be talking about simplicity and brutishness. I think, like I said, we'll do both of them together. There is a chance I may slow it down just to get some good Bible teaching in there about the way we speak and why it's important. But we're getting to the point of wrapping things up pretty soon. In the near future, not so distant future. Sorry, having a hard time making sentences tonight. But not in the not too distant future, we'll be covering that outer band, and that's the end of the study on this. So I've already got something else I'm praying about that we'd like to study when we get to that point. But let's not waste time talking about that tonight. Let me get my banner set back in place, or my border, I should say. And then we'll get into that Bible study. So our text verse we're going to start with tonight is Proverbs 21:24. Proverbs 21 and verse 24 says, "Proud and haughty scorner is his name, who dealeth in proud wrath." So he's saying the person who lets their anger or lets their pride make them angry in a way that they want to punish people. Because we've said that before. Wrath is always connected to words like fire and vengeance. It's about, satisfying this need to get vengeance on somebody. It's an anger that produces that. It's an anger that produces a need for vengeance, a need to be satisfied. And we see God's oftentimes talking about, that his vengeance needs to be satisfied in that way. So it's a word that you wouldn't necessarily have to associate as being evil, that we do it in our flesh. God can have this desire to satisfy, the wrath of God needing to be satisfied there on the cross, for example. In his case, it's righteous. For us, we do it many times in the flesh. It's very rare that we'll do it righteously. But he says, who dealeth in proud wrath? So the one who lets his pride cause him to feel like other people needs to be punished. So this is somebody who, because of their pride, they feel like you've hurt them or wronged them in some way or whatever, and they need vengeance on you. And it's purely out of a proud heart. He said that person is going to be known as a proud and haughty scorner. So there are a few verses that connect directly, like by using the words in that way. But in reality, most of the verses that are going to show you these things connect are going to be ones wherein you just look and see that things are being described exactly the same from one to the other. And Mike is saying nothing is happening, but I got 6 other people watching and nobody said anything. So if there's an issue, I'd be greatly surprised by that. So I would appreciate if somebody else could confirm something for me really quick. I've been talking for a little while now. Yeah. For me really quick. So I've got it. It's working just fine. If Mike's having problems, I don't know what to do. Somebody can try to help him through it on WhatsApp, but everything's fine from what I can see. So now, saying that, most of the verses that are going to connect pride and scornfulness are going to be verses. Oh, thank you. Well, Pedro, I appreciate you coming in. You actually beat everybody else to it. Now everybody else is coming in. And also appreciate that I see you've been watching for a while. So I appreciate your faithfulness to that. So anyways, what you see with pride and scornfulness, where you can find the connections between the two of them, are often going to be just the fact that the Bible describes them with very similar terminology that's very important. And what I mean by that is one of my later examples we'll get into is contention, that only by pride cometh contention, but yet also God says that if you cast out the scorner, contention will also cease. So God tells you that these two things are very closely connected a lot by just how he describes the two of them. So let's start off by talking about pride, what a proud and haughty spirit is, try to understand this a little bit. And then as we understand this, it'll help us to see why this is very much connected to scornfulness and why it would make somebody to lash out in a proud anger, proud wrath. So the first verse I want to look at is Proverbs 16, 18, and 19. Most people should know there's 2 verses that in Proverbs that talk about the proud and haughtiness like that, other than the one I've just read, that'll help us in some of this study. So Proverbs 16, verse 18 and verse 19 says that pride goeth before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Better it is to be of an humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. So he says, pride goeth before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. So we understand that when someone lets pride grow inside of them or haughtiness in their spirit, it's going to cause that person to be destroyed, or it's going to cause them to fall. We see the fall, and we've talked about this when we did a message on pride and how pride leads to a fall a while back. We talked about the devil falling in pride. We've talked about other people in that same. We talked about Nebuchadnezzar and other people who fell because of their pride. So we see that evident throughout the Bible. We can understand destruction because God says he's going to have to punish those who are proud. And like I said, we'll talk about that actually some on Sunday. But he says it is better it is to be of an humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. So you have that contrast, that understanding. Humility and pride are going to be opposite one of another. And so pride, I think most people have a pretty good definition for what pride is. It's when we think too high of oneself. It's when a person begins to value themselves unnaturally. Now, that shouldn't be confused with being wise in your own conceit, which also has almost the same definition. There's just some qualifiers to that. But pride is someone who's proud is someone who thinks too much of themselves. They think too highly of themselves, as maybe a simplified definition, but it's good enough. A haughty spirit, or someone who's haughty, tends to be someone who not just values themselves, but at the expense of others. So pride, you just lift yourself up. And because of that, it's natural you're going to put other people low, but haughtiness it requires that. Somebody begins to see themselves up above others and putting the others lower. So pride and haughtiness tend to go hand in hand together. A lot of times we just say pride, but a lot of times when we're saying pride, we're actually talking about haughtiness. It's that part of that person that makes them feel like you're worth less because I'm worth so much. And so you see how pride and haughtiness would go kind of hand in hand like that. It's almost the opposite of when God says that if you ask wisdom, he giveth liberally and upbraideth not. Upbraideth would be, kind of the same idea of somebody who they look down on you. God says he doesn't look down on you when you ask for wisdom, but a haughty person looks down on you at all times, I guess is what I could say. So there's the first thing, but I want you to notice that it's a haughty spirit in this case, because I do want you to realize that haughtiness and pride are much deeper issues than we probably give them credit for, because pride is an issue of the heart. I don't know that many times you'll see where the Bible makes it a deeper issue from that, but it's an issue of the heart. Whereas haughtiness is something that God rates it all the way back to the spirit of who we are, that you can have a spirit within you. So understand your spirit is deeper than even your heart is. So if you talk about the layers you have as a person, you have body, soul, spirit. So you think about like the tabernacle, you had that outer area where everybody could go. You had the holy, and then you had the holy of holies. Each time you're getting deeper and you're getting a little bit more to the point of what this place actually exists for. And you as a person, by the time you get to the spirit, you're talking about the actual, defining mechanisms of who you are as a person. It's the part of you that allows you to relate to God. It's part of you that really, is the programming, is the central operating system of who you are as a person. And so when you start talking about your spirit, God even says it's the candle that he uses to search out the inward parts of who you are. So it's very important to note that somebody's spirit goes deeper than just their heart. Your heart is about your soul, it's your emotions, your thoughts, your desires. So it's what you think of yourself as, but spirit can be a lot deeper. So you'll find people who, on let's say a soul level, on an emotional level, that kind of level, maybe they're okay people, but they have that spirit about them that even though they're trying to be nice, they're trying to do certain things, there's just a haughtiness there. There's just this thing where they seem like they look down on other people. Whereas the opposite of, or not necessarily the opposite of that, but something you see in contrast to that at least, is someone like a Joseph or a Daniel who, have a more excellent spirit than everybody else. I believe that's what was said of Daniel, is he was of a more excellent spirit. Joseph being someone who had a good spirit about him, so much so that everybody who come in contact with him just liked him. And so you see, it's deeply rooted in who you are, is what I'm trying to get at here, is that this actually goes even deeper than just the heart of a person when we talk about the haughtiness of someone, that where they value themselves at the expense of others. So that should be noted at the very least. Then we see also Proverbs 18, 12, and 13, where it does make it a matter of the heart. It's not like it's not like I'm saying this is separate from the heart. So Proverbs 18, verse 12 and verse 13, he says, before destruction, the heart of man is haughty. So you also have it in the heart. And for honor is humility. He that answereth the matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him. Now, I read that next verse because I think it's there with a good purpose. But let's deal with the first one before we get into that. As we see here, he says, before destruction, the heart of man is haughty. So what you find is that we've already seen that, pride is going to lead into destruction. God's going to have to destroy. He's going to have to deal with pride and haughtiness. He just can't ignore these things. There's so many verses where God sees the proud from far off. And like I say, we're going to get into some of this Sunday. So that's why I'm going to be light on what I have to say about that today. However, the part of this I do need to lean into a little bit is the fact that this haughtiness is not just an issue of your spirit. It is also an issue of someone's heart. It is an issue of that heart of who you are as a person. And the reason why that matters is because wisdom, knowledge, understanding, foolishness, and scornfulness are also all matters of the heart, and they're directly connected to someone's fear of the Lord or someone's unbelief. And that's something that is, well, let's actually read our next verse, Proverbs. Or I'm sorry, I said I would say more about that second verse before we do that. But the fear of the Lord, hang on to that thought. We'll come back to it in just a second because that is what my next verse is about. But let's get verse 13 before we leave the passage. It says, he that answereth the matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame to him. So the idea of what he's saying in that verse is if you're the kind of person that somebody's telling you something and you cut them off because you just assume you know what they're talking about, he says it's folly, which is like a foolish sin. It's the folly of the fool is it's like the way that the foolish person behaves. So he's saying it's a foolish thing, it's a sinful thing, it's a shameful thing for you to just assume that you know what somebody's talking about and answer them beforehand. And I sometimes do this as a joke. Sometimes I mess this up. I commit this act of folly and that I assume I know what somebody's talking about and I deal with it. Now, other times it's because I know somebody well enough that it's not uninformed. It's not like I'm answering them having never heard anything. It's just that I know this person for years, and Eli, Sophania, and Lori are the three people that this happens to the most. Is they'll start asking me a question, and I immediately know what they're going to ask me. But it's not that I'm answering them before I've heard a matter. It's just that I know them well enough that I know where this is going. That's not pride. Pride is when you have that thing where you don't necessarily have that context, that relationship to give you a reason to assume you know where this is going. You just assume you know what everybody's doing, or you think you're smarter, you're ahead of everybody else. And when I do it like that, that's when I get in trouble. And I know that about myself, that there are times where I get in trouble, especially even from the pulpit. There's times where I'll get in trouble because I'll see Sophania, who I'll pick on. I don't know what it's funny. He says he's waiting for an answer. I have no idea what he's talking about. But anyways, I'll see him from the pulpit. Oh, he did ask me a question about the Bible, but I've been busy today, man. I got stuff going on. But anyways, I'll see him laughing about something or playing there in the church, and I assume that I know what he's talking about. And sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. And I know from experience, why I'm using this as my example, is that it can bring shame. It can, there's times where I've reacted. I guess the one that I remember the most is I heard Eddie laughing one time. My brother-in-law, when he was still coming to church, I heard him laughing while after I said something in Romanian, trying to give the title to one of the Romanian hymns. And this is even more pressing because Joe laughed at me this Sunday for the same thing, but this time she actually knew what it was because of what happened last time. Is the way I say the word in Romanian sounds like a different word. And so they laugh at the way I say it because it sounds like I'm saying something entirely different. But I thought that he said something else, so I said something rude to him back, and I made myself look like a fool. So this is why I think it does connect into scornfulness and to pride, because it shows you actually in practice what that looks like when somebody lets their pride make them value themselves and their opinion more than they should. They begin to think that they know everything. They begin to think they've got it all figured out. And at times you're going to make yourself look foolish. That's where the folly comes in. Is you're going to make yourself look foolish because you're going to answer something because you think you know what they're talking about. You really don't. And I'm going to be honest, more people are guilty of this than will ever be honest with themselves and admit it. That's why I'm admitting it about myself, is because if we're going to be remotely honest, probably everybody watching this video now or in the future is guilty of this from time to time, if not regularly. And I know I'm especially guilty of this, that I assume I know what somebody's going to ask me or what somebody's talking about, and I answer them beforehand. Like I say, it's one thing if you're talking about husband to wife and you know that every morning she's going to ask you this same question, and so when she starts asking it, you answer it. It can be a little bit of pride there, but in general, that's you making an informed guess. I'm talking about people who you can't finish a question or finish a sentence with them because they always think that they know what you're asking and they start answering you before you even finish. I'm going to tell you, there's a few people I know who like that, and it's hard to talk to them. And I'm sure people feel that way about me sometimes. As for Stephania, maybe I should mention in prayer that Lori's doing better now, so I don't know that you necessarily have to pray for it, but Lori's had tonsillitis, so apparently I passed it to her at some point, and she's waited this long for it to manifest. But Lori's had tonsillitis and has been sick, and I've also been working at the church and taking care of the kids and stuff, trying to help her. So if you wrote me a message asking you a Bible question or something, is the case of Stephania, that's why you didn't get your answers, because I thought feeding my kids was pretty high on the list of priorities. So, I'm joking. I don't mean that to actually sound rude. I'm just messing with Stephania because he's messing with me in the comments about it. All right. So as far as pride, you see that pride and haughtiness, we can already start to see that there's a lot there together. This idea of somebody who thinks too much of themselves, this idea of haughtiness being someone who thinks high of themselves at the expense of others. And then you bring scornfulness into this, and you have this person who thinks they know everything. They think they've got it all figured out. And so because of that, they're not willing to hear anything. They're not willing to listen. They always mock and laugh at, whatever you present to them. They scorn at it. So once you take that, then we can start to, try to build a little bit more on the idea. So now let's go to Proverbs 8 and bring the fear of the Lord into this. Proverbs 8, verse 13 says, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogancy, and the evil way and the froward mouth do I hate. So what is he presenting to us here? His definition of how the fear of the Lord is going to change us. And the fear of the Lord is going to put us in a direction where, and this should be wisdom talking at this point. I don't think we've got past the halfway point where you switch to understanding. So wisdom is saying, I hate these things. Wisdom is saying, speaking as from a woman, that she hates these things. And if you have wisdom, you too will learn to hate these things. But it begins, of course, with the fear of the Lord. Wisdom begins with the heart being touched by the fear of the Lord. So if someone has the fear of the Lord in them, they're going to hate evil. And then what is that explained as? Hating evil in this case means hating pride and arrogancy. Arrogancy at this point would seem to be in the direction of haughtiness that is being used almost as a synonym there. And then the evil way and the froward mouth do I hate. And so frowardness we know is an extension of foolishness. You could think that the evil way in this case could be speaking of foolishness. I won't argue one way or the other that, because it's not actually what I'm here for. I'm here for pride and arrogancy, to show that if somebody's going into the realm of wisdom by having been touched by the fear of the Lord, they are going to hate pride and arrogancy, or proud and haughty spirit, that kind of thing. They're going to hate that, having that air about you, just that presence where haughtiness comes in. It's just like you look down on everyone around you. Pride being there in the heart, haughtiness being manifested all the way through who you are as a person. He's saying you're going to hate that. You're not going to be willing to let pride get in the way, because wisdom wants to learn. Wisdom wants to be taught. Wisdom wants to grow. Wisdom loves instruction. So does understanding. And so these two things are going to naturally be against pride, because their natural desire is to take in information and either break it down or use it to build up your understanding and so forth of the world around you. Whereas pride inhibits that. It gets in the way. So they're going to naturally produce humility, but when somebody is touched by unbelief and they go into the realm of foolishness and scornfulness, they're naturally going to be producing pride. And you're seeing that in this verse. Then Proverbs 29 and verse number 23. Proverbs 29 and verse number 23. A man's pride shall bring him low, but honor shall uphold the humble in spirit. So there is going back to this idea that pride will destroy us. He says, when you have pride, it's going to bring you low. If you humble yourself, honor will uphold you. You'll have honor to lift you up. But essentially, the idea is that God's going to humble those who won't humble themselves. Maybe he's what he's talking about in this verse. And when you think about a lot of what he says about wisdom, a lot of what he says about foolishness, understanding, scornfulness, you'll notice that's pretty much the contrast between the two of them. That the fool will have to bear it alone. The scorner will have to bear it alone. The wise he'll be praised. He'll be lifted up. The man of understanding, he'll be lifted up. So you have this idea that these three things are interwoven one with another. Again, more so scornfulness and pride, understanding and humility than wisdom with those two, or foolishness with the other two. But there's still this interwoven relationship where they're going to grow together and they're going to feed off of one another. You could essentially, to be honest, you could probably take the chart that I've made and rearrange it in a certain way to make it so that your base level, instead of including knowledge and simplicity, has pride and humility on it. Problem with that would be it'd be a disservice to the fact that God lists those three types of intelligence and three types of unintelligence side by side. So that would be the issue with changing it that way. But you could theoretically do that because they're all woven together. They have this relationship, this mutual relationship where they help one another. Then the next verse I'd like to look at, and this is where we can start getting into contrasting some of this stuff and seeing how they connect together, would be Proverbs 3 and verse 34. As we start looking at how this connects to scornfulness, it says, surely he scorneth scorners. Proverbs 3:34. It says, and talking about God, surely he scorneth the scorners, but he giveth grace unto the lowly. So who are the lowly? I mean, the lowly is another way of saying the humble. Most time you'll find that verses, that one place it says humble, another place it'll say lowly. Pride is almost always contrast against lowliness. So you see this, that at this point he's contrasting the scorner versus the lowly. He's putting the scorner where you would normally, because remember, in Proverbs, this is important. In Proverbs, you usually have a balance. You have a pivot point in the center of your verse, and that pivot point, one side of it is either going to, what you normally have is the first half is either going to be a complete contrast to the second half, so they balance each other out, or what you're going to have is that the first half is then re-explained in a different way by the second half so that they balance each other out. Think about the next verse. It says, the wise shall inherit glory, but shame shall be the promotion of fools. So he says the wise are going to inherit glory. That's going to be their inheritance, the thing that they get as a gift handed down to them. But the promotion of fools, the thing that they're going to receive from those over them is shame. So shame versus glory, that's what the wise get versus what the fool would get. So you see, you have that perfect balancing point in the middle of the verse, and in both of these verses, it's literally that you have the colon there in the middle. The dot dot. You have the colon in the middle, and that's your pivot point. And then the first half of the verse is what happens to the proud, and the second half is what happens to the lowly. But in this case, he uses the word scorner. Surely he scorneth the scorners. Now, the reason for that is, remember, Proverbs are intended to be wise sayings that you can memorize. Proverbs are written with the expectation that you're going to be able to memorize these sayings and commit them to your heart so that you can use them when you need them. The intention is that as you read them, you're going to get these things ingrained in you. And that's why they're not long, 10, 20, 30 verse passages explaining something. They're short, straight to the point, short and sweet little verses to explain something, is because that's the nature of a proverb. That's why the book is written this way. Each verse is its own little wise saying that you could usually subtract them from their context and still keep the meaning of the verse, because usually there's not context. Now, sometimes what you'll see is there's like a theme going across a chapter. In fact, that's actually very, very common, that there'll be a theme that runs across several verses. And there are times where you'll see that there's many verses that make up one thought. Proverbs chapter 1 starts like that you have several verses together that make a thought, then several verses together that make a thought, and then a huge passage that makes a thought. Same thing in chapter 2. You start off that way. So it's not that it's always singular verses. You actually have quite a few blocks of passage, of text that make a single thought. But the intention normally with a proverb is that you can take those and memorize them. So that's why you have kind of that poetic structure to them. So in this case, scorning is when you mock at something. It's when you laugh at it. It's when you put it low and put it down. Like, I don't need that. So he's saying, surely he scorneth. So God scorneth the scorners. So surely God is going to put low. He's going to mock at. He's going to laugh at. He's not going to have any listening ear, no interest in the person who also themselves laughs at, mocks at, and doesn't have a listening ear to anything. The ones who don't want to learn, the proud in this case. And you see that it's the proud by the fact that the second half of the verse, but he giveth grace to the lowly. Well, God gives grace to the humble. So we know lowly in this case is being used as a synonym for humble. So God, contrasting that, says, but the ones who will humble themselves, he gives grace to them. So the scorner gets what he gives. The humble, well, they get grace. That's the balancing and the pivoting point of that verse. So you see there's an explanation there. There is this straightforward proverb to show you everything you need to know about this relationship is in that verse. To be honest, you could take pretty much everything I talked about last week and this week too. And if you have the foundation of the rest of what we've talked about before this, you could get these thoughts out of that one verse because of the fact that God's showing you there is a relationship, that humility is going to allow God to be gracious to you and help you to grow in your wisdom and understanding. Whereas if you're going to scorn, you're not going to listen, God's not going to listen to you either. That's the point he's making here. So then I said, what you begin to notice about scornfulness and pride, so that you can begin to see that these two things work together, like they work in tandem. They have to have one another to work properly, because if somebody was just proud, I guess what I'm trying to say, somebody can't just be proud. Somebody who's proud is going to be scornful because otherwise you can't maintain that pride. That's how you maintain your pride. When somebody tries to correct you or call you out on something, you don't listen to them. You assume they're wrong and you're right, and you don't listen to it. If you don't have that, then you're not going to maintain your pride. Eventually, you're going to let that pride go. And the same thing with scornfulness. You can't maintain scornfulness without pride. Scornfulness requires that you value your opinion above everybody else's. It requires that you feel like you've got it all figured out and everybody else is wrong. So you have to have pride to do that. So that's what I'm saying. It's something that you see. The relationship is very interesting and very unique compared to most of the stuff we've studied in this. Wisdom and understanding have a relationship like that, and foolishness and scornfulness have a relationship like that. That's why I say that you see that you could connect all three of these things in a circle, where that they connect to one another. I could do a separate chart, I guess, to show how these feed into each other circularly. Now, what I actually decided to do, as I said, I'm going to try to keep it fairly contained to a certain degree in my thoughts here, is I want to go through and read some of these verses about scornfulness, and I think you'll see that it's similar. Now, I specifically targeted one, though, before I do that, and that's Proverbs 22:10. He says, cast out the scorner, and contention shall go out. Yea, strife and reproach shall cease. That should remind you of something, because the Bible says only by pride cometh contention. And I'll look that up for you real quick, which verse that is, because of the computer crash earlier. I didn't get the chance to look that up for you. Proverbs 13:10. Only by pride cometh contention, but with the well-advised is wisdom. So you think about that. God says it is impossible for there to be contention unless pride is a part of it. Meaning that contention is when we contend with one another. So since I picked on Sophania a little bit, I'll pick on him again, but I'll just use him as my example now. And Sophania, you'll get your answer eventually, but like I said, I'm busy today, so it has to wait. But I forgot about it because I was busy. I'm trying to fix some stuff at the church and work on the house stuff. But anyways, let's just say me and Sophania are in a disagreement, and he thinks he's right, and I think I'm right. And so we begin to contend with one another. That's contention. We get to a place where me and him can't agree on stuff because of the fact that he thinks he's right, I think I'm right. Well, God says that can't happen unless pride is involved. The only way that two people could look at the evidence and look at the facts and still continue to argue about it is because one of them is not willing to let go of their pride. And the only way it's going to become an argument, like we're going to fight about it, is probably both of them are not letting go of their pride. Even the person who's right can be proud. So it's an issue of this. Like I'll put it in a more personal context. If you're married and you're arguing all the time, husband and wife, so that there's contention in that relationship, it's because both people are proud. It's because both of them are not willing to let up and admit they're wrong about something. And while it'd probably be better for me to give an example of myself in this, I'm just going to be honest. What's coming to my mind first is the opposite. So you'll just have to not tell Lori that I said this. But what I think of is me and Lori have had a few times where we'll have a discussion about something, and then while we're debating it, she will not, no matter what I do, admit that I'm right. However, a week later or something, sometimes much, much later, she'll come back, and then that's when she'll realize, she'll present it as if she found this, not as if she got it from me, this information that I was already giving. Sometimes she'll come back and say, you were right about this. Now, on the other hand, I know I'm proud. Like in the moment when I'm mad, you will have a hard time showing me where I'm wrong. But the moment it clicks with me and I suddenly realize I'm wrong, that's one thing I'll give for myself. Not a lot good that can be said about me, but it's one of the few things I tend to do okay, is that the moment I realize I'm wrong, I will immediately step back and be like, yeah, you're right. I'm wrong about that. I've gotten better. I didn't used to be as good about that. Before I got married, I was used to being right about everything. Then I got married and found out I could be wrong sometimes. So that was part of the relationship for me. But the point is, you can't have that according to God. You can't have contention. So you can't argue with your brothers and sisters in Christ. You can't argue with the preacher. You can't argue with your spouse. You can't argue with your boss. You can't argue with your coworkers unless there's pride mixed in there somewhere. And while it's easy to point the finger and always assume that the pride is on the other side of the argument, usually it's going to be coming from both sides. Now, why that matters is because what does he say? He says, if you get rid of the scorner, the contention is going to go away too. So it's impossible that you can have a contention without pride. But also, he says, if you get rid of that person who's a scorner, contention is going to go away with them. So he's showing you that pride and contention, pride and scornfulness go hand in hand together. That when you have that person who, like we're talking about, doesn't want to listen, you're showing them the facts, you're showing the evidence, and they just don't want to hear you. They're not going to hear it out. They cover their ears and don't want to listen because they think they've got it all figured out or whatever thing. God says, if you get rid of that, if you can get rid of that attitude, you get rid of that person, then contention's also going to disappear too. Because when we stop being like that and we start being willing to listen, we don't just assume that we're right. We don't just assume that we've got it all figured out. Then you actually can learn something. Then somebody can help you. And that's why this message, it just blows my mind sometimes. See how God puts stuff together. Because what I just said is the perfect crossroad of our Wednesday night Bible study, Sunday midday Bible study, and this Bible study. We just, in one statement, some of the most important things I've been trying to say across 3 different Bible studies, that it's impossible for me to correspond due to the fact that they're not connected in any way, could come together in one simple thought. And that's the fact that when we let go of the pride, let go of that scornfulness, and we start being willing to listen, then we can learn something. Well, Sunday, we're talking about pride is an abomination. Wednesday nights, we just finished talking about how when we're not willing to listen, we have that dullness of hearing, then the preacher's hands are tied with what he can show us, and we stay babies. So you see, it's amazing to me how all that just kind of intersects sometimes, where it's like God just puts all that together because somebody needs to get a hold of that thought. Now, I'm not saying I know who it is or anything, but somebody definitely needs to pick up that thought since God intersected all of it together. So let me go through, because I said I was going to try not to go long on the lesson tonight, and I'm already pushing to my limit of time. So let me go through and read these verses about the scorner, scornful, all that kind of stuff through the book of Proverbs. There's 40 verses through the Bible, so I'm going to read all verses in the Bible, just Proverbs. So we've already read Proverbs 3:34. Surely he scorneth the scorners, but he giveth grace unto the lowly. Proverbs 9:7. He that reproveth a scorner getteth to himself shame, and he that rebuketh a wicked man getteth himself a blot. So what is he saying here? We talked about wickedness being when your heart's already so far gone that you're not willing to listen, you're not willing to be reproved or corrected. You've become like an infection that has to be cut off. Think about that in contrast to scornfulness in this verse. He's saying that if you reprove a scorner, so that's somebody who, in this case, mentally, intellectually, is because of the pride of his heart, has got to a place where he's just not willing to listen. He's not willing to hear anything. He doesn't want to talk to you. He doesn't, I've got it all figured out. I know everything, and it doesn't matter what information you present. They'll go online and look for some preacher who disagrees so that they can try to argue with you. That kind of mentality. You see there being contrast in that verse, and he's saying both of them, you're bringing shame to yourself. Then verse 8 of the same passage says, reprove not a scorner lest he hate thee, rebuke a wise man and he'll love thee. And so there's the conclusion of that thought. He's saying if you reprove a scorner, he's just going to hate you. He's not going to appreciate the fact that you're correcting him because he's already made up his heart and his mind that he's right and everybody else is wrong. Same thing with the wicked and so forth in terms of morally doing that. This is more pride and intellectual, whereas wickedness is more morally doing that. And then you have verse number 12 of the same chapter says, if thou be wise, thou shalt be wise for thyself, but if thou scornest, thou alone shalt bear it. So he's saying, if you're going to be wise, it's your benefit. You prosper from that. But if you're going to be proud and you don't want to listen, you also are the ones who has to suffer for that. Proverbs 13 verse 1, a wise son heareth his father's instruction, but a scorner heareth not rebuke. So again, that contrast. A wise son will hear what his father is teaching him. A scorner, when you try to correct him, he's not going to listen to you. A scorner, Proverbs 14:6, a scorner seeketh wisdom and findeth it not, but knowledge is easy unto him that understandeth. So we've talked about that last half quite a few times, that someone who has understanding in their heart, that being the contrast here for the scorner, someone who has that understanding in his heart, it's easy for him to take in information and break it down and know how to use it because it's what understanding does. It takes in information, it breaks it down, it files it away so that you have that information available to you to then use wisdom to build it back up into something. Whereas the first half of the verse says, a scorner seeketh wisdom, but he cannot find it. He can't do it because, again, it's a heart issue, and the heart here is clouded by pride and by foolishness and scornfulness and all those things, so that there's no room for wisdom. A scorner, Proverbs 15 verse 12, a scorner loveth not one that reproveth him, neither will he give unto the wise. Will he go unto the wise? I'm sorry. So a scorner doesn't care about it. He doesn't love the person who reproves him. He's not interested in that. He doesn't want it. He's not going to appreciate it. I've always been told that advice that's unsolicited will also be unappreciated. That's not entirely true. Advice that's unsolicited by someone who lacks wisdom will be unappreciated. Someone who has wisdom will always appreciate a rebuke or a reproof or any of that kind of stuff. Maybe not in the moment, but at some point they're going to start to appreciate it because they see that it was there to their benefit. Now, on the other side of that, though, if you don't have any wisdom, you go around reproving and rebuking and trying to correct everybody, that makes you the foolish and the scornful person in this story. So maybe make sure you have wisdom before you go around correcting everybody and trying to tell them how to do stuff. It says also, neither will he go to the wise. So he's not going to go to the wise to try to learn from them. He's already got it figured out. He's full of himself. He's full of his pride. He don't need the wise help. That's his opinion. Proverbs 19 verse 25 says, smite a scorner and the simple will beware, and reprove one that hath understanding, and he will understand knowledge. So there's your contrast. If you smite a scorner, he's not going to learn, but someone who's simple, someone who just hasn't been educated yet, they're at least going to rise up and take knowledge of that. Then someone who, if you reprove someone that has understanding, then he will understand that knowledge. He'll not just take knowledge of it, he'll know what to do with that knowledge. Then Proverbs 19 verse 28, so same chapter, a few verses down, so you should probably read the whole passage through here if you want to get some good stuff. It says, an ungodly witness scorneth a judgment, and the mouth of the wicked devoureth iniquity. So an ungodly witness scorneth judgment. They don't adhere to it. They're not willing to listen to it. They don't believe it. Judgment. I'm skipping that one some because this is more so about the ungodly witness than it is the scorner. Judgments are prepared for scorners, and stripes for the back of fools. So we already know about the foolish person. that because he's devoid of the truth, he's abandoned the truth. You have to just about beat him to get him to come back to it. In the case of the pride, there has to be judgment put on him. There has to be punishment put on him in order for the scorner, for him to get rid of the pride of his heart, so that he be willing to listen. Proverbs 21 and verse 11, when the scorner is punished, the simple is made wise, and when the wise is instructed, he receiveth knowledge. So almost the exact opposite of what we saw in the verse not the exact opposite. It's the same exact thing we saw in the verse about understanding, only this time it's about wisdom more so than about understanding. We saw that just a minute ago. Proverbs 21 verse 24, we already saw this. Proud and haughty scorner is his name, who dealeth in proud wrath. Proverbs 22 verse 10 says, cast out the scorner. It was the one we just looked at. Contention shall go out, yea, strife and reproach shall cease. Proverbs 24 and verse 9 is the last one. The thought of foolishness is sin, and the scorner is an abomination to men. Now, what he's saying when he says the scorner is an abomination to men is to say that to me and you, like just people in general, when you meet somebody who's so full of pride that they won't listen to anything, it's unnatural to us. It's a disgusting thing. It's like it's a sin that just doesn't make sense to any of us, why somebody would behave like that. So that's the list. Now, if you think about everything we just went through in those verses, and again, there's more verses. I think I said there's 40 some in the Bible that use the word scorn, scorner, scornful, something of that nature. However, if you go through that whole list and think of these people that's being described here, everything I just said about scornfulness either directly tied into pride or required pride to be that part of this. You saw it in the verse, or you know that God says the exact same thing about pride. So pride and scornfulness, you see how they go together, because what happens, and if you have any questions, this would be a good time to start typing them. But what happens when it comes to pride and scornfulness is this relationship is created between the two of them, where scornfulness is this idea that I feel like I know everything. I got it all figured out. Pride is this idea that I value myself and my opinions more than anybody else. Haughtiness also is connected with pride. They're put together, and that's why I didn't just put one of them on the list. I put them together, even though you could say humble and lowly on the other side. I think most time we think of lowliness the same way we think of humbleness, humility, whereas on this side of things with pride and a proud and haughty spirit, we don't necessarily think of those as being one thing. So much as we think of pride as being this idea of me valuing myself unnaturally, above everything else, and haughtiness is me doing it at the expense of everybody else. It's me looking down on you because I value myself so much. It's that attitude that has people walking around with their nose up in the air. That's where haughtiness comes into this. It's when something is not, it's nothing, and yet for some reason you feel like you're above everybody else. And so you take those three things and you think about it, it seems like there's a central idea in there somewhere of someone valuing themselves too much, and it produces this or this or this, so that you have, I think too much of myself, so my opinion's all that matters. I've got it all figured out. Nobody else knows what they're talking about. I think too much of myself, so I look down on others because of it. I think too much of myself, so I think I'm the only one who matters. You think about it, all of those ideas stem from one central point in the middle. It's like if you draw a Y, you've got that little point in the middle where all of that intersects. And that's what all these points do. They all intersect at this idea of somebody being full of themselves. So when you're full of yourself, you look down on everybody else because they're not as good as you are. You think you're the best, so nobody else is going to live up to that. When you are full of yourself, then you think you're the only one who matters. When you're full of yourself, you think your opinion is the only one who matters. You think you've got it all figured out. So scornfulness, I've always said, is a cup that's so full of itself that there's no room to pour anything in it. Therefore, it cannot learn. Pride and haughtiness is a person who's so full of themselves that there's no room for anybody else in their lives. They're only going to fight with the people around them. They're only going to look down at the people around them. Even God doesn't have place in their life because they're so full of themselves, someone who's proud and haughty. So that's why it's such a dangerous thing, and that's why it's something that, as a Christian, we're going to talk about this on Sunday more, but you can't afford to have pride in your life. You can't afford to think of yourself too highly. So I didn't see any questions coming in. Maybe somebody's still typing one, but I gave a couple minutes there at least while I was giving kind of a closing spiel to all of this. for someone to type a question if they had one. Hope it all made sense. I know in the beginning it seemed like I was having a hard time just putting words together. And a large part of that comes down to the fact that, like I say, the last 2 days have been quite busy. I have not been in my office probably at all this week. I don't remember being, I was in here last night because I recorded videos. But other than being in here long enough to record the next pastors react, actually the next two pastors react, I haven't actually been able to work in my office. So even preparing for this message, I got home just in time to run up here and start working on preparing for it. So that's probably got a lot to do with it, if I seem distracted or anything. All right, so I don't see any questions coming in. I'm going to assume I don't have any questions. Like I say, we'll probably talk about it. If you didn't type it and you have something, we'll probably talk about it a little bit more later. Appreciate everyone who's been part of the Bible study with us. I'll go ahead and throw up that little banner there. It was good to see. We had a good number of people coming in at different points. Had people on Facebook and YouTube, different places. I was glad to see Fadi was there on Facebook. I hope you're doing well, brother. I know you said you're doing a little bit better. Eli also yesterday said he was doing a little bit better, but I saw he asked for prayer in the WhatsApp group. Just didn't have a chance to respond. I saw Mike was quick to respond to him. So I know there's some people doing better. Let's say Lori was sick enough. She was willing to go to the doctor. Nobody had to make her go. It's the first time I've seen her do that yesterday. And so she went and got some antibiotics, but she's doing better now from the tonsillitis. She was out even working in the garden today, so I think she'll be okay. But those are some prayer requests I'll throw out there. And then, like I say, I appreciate those being a part of it. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but wow, Pedro Santos, I appreciate that you let me know earlier the live stream was going good, and also that you're somebody who isn't necessarily part of our church, our little group here in Ghent, but I see that you faithfully follow a lot of this stuff, so I appreciate that. All right, thank you everybody for being a part of it. We'll go ahead and get ready to close down the live stream for tonight. Hope it's been a help to you. I appreciate again all of you being here and the good number that was part of it. Have some really good pastors reacts coming up in the near future, especially the next one I've got on the list. So I'm really excited to share that with people soon. But I hope you have a good evening. We look forward to seeing everybody at church tomorrow. We'll be tackling one of the most difficult passages, I think, in the Bible tomorrow. So I encourage you, if you're not there, to at least check out the live stream of it. For people who have issues concerning salvation and the struggles of understanding salvation, especially in regards to eternal security, this is the hardest passage, I think, for everybody. And so I'm a little bit excited to get into that one because it's one that I've heard a lot of crazy explanations for. I've heard a lot of misuses of it, and we'll hopefully get in there and help people to understand it better. So I encourage you, if you're not there, to at least look up that video and be a part of it. It should be, I think, entitled "Those Who Were Once Enlightened." It's in the study of Hebrews if you want to find it. All right. You have a good evening. We look forward to seeing you at church tomorrow or through the live stream or however we see you.